Most men lose leverage in relationships not because they care, but because they give access too freely. Emotional availability without boundaries slowly erodes value, even when intentions are good. When someone knows they can reach you at any time, get reassurance on demand, and feel your presence without effort, your attention becomes predictable. And anything predictable eventually becomes invisible. This is where no contact changes everything. The moment you step back, something fundamental shifts. You're no longer constantly available to absorb emotions, fix moods, or fill silence. That absence is not emptiness, it's contrast. And contrast is what creates value. When you remove emotional availability, you remove certainty. She can no longer assume you'll always be there, always responding, always validating. That uncertainty is uncomfortable, but it's also activating. It wakes something up. Human psychology is wired to value what can be lost. When your presence was guaranteed, it didn't feel scarce. When it's gone, the mind starts replaying memories, conversations, and moments that once felt ordinary. What changed wasn't you, it was access. No contact forces her to reassess the role you played in her emotional life, because now that role is empty. This is where many men get it wrong. They think no contact is about punishment or manipulation. It's not. It's about restoring balance. You're not withholding to get a reaction, you're withdrawing to stop over-investing. That distinction matters because it changes your energy completely. Instead of acting from need, you act from self-respect. When you're always emotionally available, you train people how to treat you. You teach them that your time, attention, and presence come without effort. No contact breaks that pattern. It communicates without words that access to you is not automatic, and that alone elevates your position. What happens next is subtle but powerful. Without you consistently reinforcing the connection, her mind starts doing the work. She wonders what you're doing, how you're feeling, whether you've moved on. Silence creates space for curiosity, and curiosity is the beginning of renewed interest. At the same time, something important is happening inside you. You're no longer feeding your self-worth through her responses. You're no longer checking your phone for validation. Your emotional state starts stabilizing. That internal shift is just as important as anything happening on her side. You regain control over your reactions, and control is attractive because it signals strength. Value isn't about dominance or distance, it's about boundaries. And no contact is a boundary that says, I don't chase attention that isn't freely given. That message lands deeply. Even if it's never spoken, people respect what doesn't beg to be chosen. As time passes, the contrast becomes sharper. She remembers how you made her feel, not because you reminded her, but because your absence highlighted it. Emotional availability, when removed, reveals its weight. The support you gave, the presence you held, the consistency you offered, all of it becomes clearer in hindsight. And here's the part most men underestimate: when you stop pouring energy outward, it turns inward. You start focusing on your life, your goals, your routines. You become more grounded, more focused, more self-directed. That growth compounds. And when someone senses that you're no longer centered around them, their perception of you changes. You're no longer a source of comfort, you're a man with momentum. This is why women often return after no contact, not because they were tricked, but because value was restored. The dynamic reset. You stopped proving, explaining, and over-functioning. You allowed space to do what words never could. But the real win isn't her return. The real win is that you no longer need it. You're not using no contact to wait, you're using it to detach, and detachment is what makes you calm, centered, and unshakable. When someone returns after no contact, they're responding to the version of you who no longer chases. And whether they return or not, you've already reclaimed something far more important: your self-respect. And once you understand that, no contact stops being a tactic and becomes a standard you live by. When you step away and go no contact, the first thing that disappears is not communication, it's comfort. And comfort is far more powerful than most people realize. Many connections survive not because of deep attraction or long-term intention, but because one person quietly provides emotional stability. You become the place where feelings get processed, doubts get soothed, and loneliness gets softened. When that presence vanishes, it leaves behind an emotional vacuum that the mind can't ignore. At first, the silence feels strange. There's a pause where your absence hasn't fully registered yet. But then the patterns break. There's no familiar message, no quick reassurance, no emotional grounding. And in that gap, something important begins to happen. Her mind starts searching for what's missing. That search is not conscious at first, it's emotional. She feels off without immediately knowing why. This is how the emotional vacuum works. Humans are wired to seek equilibrium. When a stable emotional input disappears, the nervous system wants to restore balance. And the fastest way to do that is to think about what was providing that balance before. Your absence becomes a presence in her mind, not because you forced it, but because you removed something essential. Memories surface differently in silence. Moments that felt small or routine now carry weight. Conversations replay. Shared laughter feels louder in hindsight. The mind fills empty space with meaning, and meaning often turns into reflection. She begins to compare how she feels now to how she felt when you were there. That comparison doesn't require logic, it happens automatically. This is why silence often speaks louder than explanation. When you're present, emotions are regulated in real time. When you're gone, they echo. The emotional vacuum amplifies everything, and the absence of your attention forces her to sit with her own feelings instead of leaning on yours. Many men try to recreate this effect by saying the right words or making dramatic exits, but words fade, silence lingers. Silence gives the mind room to wander, and wandering thoughts have a way of circling back to what felt safe, familiar, and grounding. At the same time, the emotional vacuum doesn't just affect her, it changes you. Without constantly supporting someone else's emotional world, you reconnect with your own. You become less reactive, more observant. You start to notice how much energy you were giving without receiving. That awareness is uncomfortable at first, but it's also liberating. When you stop filling the emotional space, you stop overfunctioning. You're no longer managing moods or anticipating needs. That space you reclaim turns into clarity, and clarity sharpens your standards. You begin to understand that emotional presence should be mutual, not one-sided. From her perspective, the vacuum becomes a mirror. Without your steady presence, she has to face her own emotional patterns. There's no one to immediately distract her from uncertainty. No one to stabilize her when things feel unsettled. That confrontation can be uncomfortable, but it's also revealing. It forces reflection, not reaction. This is often when curiosity starts to form. Not dramatic longing, subtle curiosity. She wonders how you're doing, whether you're thinking about her, whether you've moved on. Silence invites questions, and questions create mental engagement. That engagement pulls attention back toward you, even when you're not physically there. The key here is that you're not trying to create this effect. You're allowing it. You're not monitoring her response or waiting for a message. You're focused inward, and that inward focus changes your emotional posture. You're no longer leaning forward, you're standing still. That stillness is powerful. It communicates emotional independence. It shows that you don't need constant connection to feel stable, and that independence often becomes the very thing that draws attention back. What most men don't realize is that emotional availability, when overused, becomes a crutch. When it's removed, the other person has to stand on their own, and in doing so, they become aware of what they lost. But again, the goal isn't to be missed. The goal is to stop filling spaces that cost you your self-respect. The emotional vacuum is a byproduct, not the objective. You're choosing not to rescue, not to soothe, not to chase. You're choosing balance. And if she reaches out, it's not because you disappeared to provoke a reaction. It's because the silence revealed something she hadn't fully acknowledged before, the value of what you provided. And if she doesn't, you still win, because you've reclaimed your emotional energy and redirected it toward a life that doesn't depend on being needed to feel whole. That's the real power of creating space. It forces truth to rise without confrontation or conflict. And once truth is revealed, you no longer need to explain anything at all. When you stop reaching out, something subtle but deeply unsettling happens on the other side. Access is no longer guaranteed. The comfort of knowing you're always there quietly disappears. And that loss of certainty triggers one of the strongest emotional responses a human being can experience, the fear of losing access to something valuable. Most people don't realize how much they rely on access until it's gone. When you were present, available, responsive, and emotionally steady, your presence became part of her emotional environment. It felt permanent. And permanence lowers urgency. No contact disrupts that illusion. It introduces a question mark where there used to be a period. At first, the mind tries to normalize the silence. She may tell herself you're just busy or that it doesn't matter. But as time passes and the silence continues, the subconscious begins to register a deeper message. You're not waiting. You're not checking in. You're not orbiting. And that changes everything. Uncertainty is uncomfortable because it removes control. When she had access to you, she controlled when the connection happened. Even if she didn't engage much, she knew she could if she wanted to. No contact takes that option away, and when choice is removed, value is reassessed. This is where fear of loss enters. Not fear in a dramatic sense, but a quiet internal tension. She starts wondering if you've emotionally detached, if someone else has your attention, if she misjudged how much you cared. These thoughts don't come from manipulation, they come from the absence of reassurance. The human mind is wired to protect what it believes it might lose. When access is threatened, attention increases. This is why people often don't appreciate consistency until it's gone. Your silence forces her to confront the possibility that she no longer has a place in your emotional world. What makes this powerful is that you're not doing anything, you're not provoking, you're not explaining, you're not trying to be missed. You're simply not available. And that restraint communicates strength. It shows that your emotional state is not dependent on her reactions. This lack of neediness is what shifts the dynamic. When someone senses they can't control your attention anymore, they reevaluate their position. You're no longer predictable. And unpredictability, when paired with self-control, commands respect. As the fear of losing access grows, comparison begins. She measures her current emotional state against how things felt when you were around. She notices the gap. She feels the difference. And that contrast makes your absence heavier than your presence ever was. At the same time, you're undergoing your own transformation. By stepping back, you break the habit of seeking validation. You stop scanning for responses. You stop interpreting silence as rejection. Your nervous system calms. You regain emotional autonomy. That autonomy is critical, because the moment you no longer fear losing her is often the moment she begins to fear losing you. Energy shifts when dependency disappears. The person who is willing to walk away holds the power, not because they dominate, but because they're free. Fear of loss doesn't always lead to immediate action. Sometimes it shows up as watching from a distance, checking social cues, subtle curiosity, quiet monitoring. But even without direct contact, the internal shift is happening. She's no longer certain of her position in your life. And here's the truth most men miss. You don't benefit from her fear, you benefit from your freedom. No contact works not because it scares someone into returning, but because it restores your balance. It removes emotional overextension and replaces it with grounded presence. If she reaches out, it's often because the fear of losing access finally outweighs the comfort of distance. But if she doesn't, the outcome is still positive. You've detached from a dynamic that required you to overgive and underseive. This is why no contact is never about waiting. The moment it becomes waiting, it loses its power. It's about stepping back into your own life, your own rhythm, your own priorities. It's about remembering that access to you is earned, not assumed. And when you truly internalize that, the fear of loss is no longer something you create, it's something you no longer feel. And that's when everything begins to change. When you go no contact and actually commit to it, the most important message isn't sent to her, it's sent through you. Self-control is felt long before it's understood. And in relationships, emotional discipline speaks louder than reassurance ever could. It quietly communicates strength, stability, and self-respect without needing validation in return. Most men believe attraction grows through effort. More talking, more explaining, more proving. But effort without boundaries doesn't signal confidence, it signals fear of loss. No contact reverses that signal. It shows that you're capable of stepping back without collapsing emotionally. And that ability alone repositions how you're perceived. Self-control is rare. It's uncomfortable. It requires sitting with uncertainty instead of reacting to it. When you don't reach out, don't explain, and don't chase, you're demonstrating that your emotional state isn't controlled by someone else's behavior. That independence is deeply attractive because it suggests inner strength. Neediness isn't always obvious. Sometimes it looks like kindness. Sometimes it looks like patience. But underneath it is an attachment to outcome. No contact removes that attachment. It says, I don't need immediate reassurance to feel grounded. And that message lands even when nothing is said. From her perspective, this creates a shift. She's used to men reacting, questioning, over-communicating, trying to fix things. When you don't do that, it breaks the pattern. Silence paired with consistency signals confidence. It suggests you trust yourself more than you fear losing her. This is where respect begins to rebuild. Respect doesn't come from being agreeable or accommodating. It comes from standing firm in your boundaries. When you don't chase after being ignored, you communicate that you won't reward disengagement with more effort. That boundary resets the dynamic. At the same time, your internal world begins to stabilize. Without constantly checking for responses or interpreting silence, your nervous system calms. You stop living in anticipation. You return to the present. That calm presence changes how you show up everywhere, not just in relationships. Self-control also sharpens your awareness. You start to see patterns more clearly. You notice when effort wasn't reciprocated. You recognize where you were over-giving. That clarity doesn't create bitterness, it creates standards. And standards protect your energy. When someone senses that you're no longer emotionally reactive, they experience you differently. You're no longer a source of instant reassurance. You're someone with depth and restraint. That restraint suggests that your attention is valuable because it's not given impulsively. This is why silence often reignites attraction. It's not the absence that pulls, it's the strength behind it. Silence without self-control feels empty. Silence with self-control feels grounded. It communicates that you're comfortable standing alone. No contact also removes emotional pressure. You're no longer pushing for clarity or closure. You allow space to exist, and in that space, emotions settle. Sometimes they deepen. Sometimes they fade. But either way, they reveal the truth. The biggest shift happens when you stop needing a specific outcome. When you're okay whether she returns or not, your energy changes. You're no longer waiting. You're moving forward. That forward momentum is magnetic because it reflects purpose. And here's the part most men miss. Self-control isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about mastering it. You still feel. You just don't let feelings dictate your behavior. That mastery builds confidence from the inside out. If she reaches out, she's responding to the version of you who didn't break under silence. If she doesn't, you still gain something far more important, self-respect. You learn that your worth isn't tied to being chosen. It's tied to how you choose yourself. This is what no contact really teaches, that you don't need to prove your value. You live it. You don't chase attention. You allow it to meet you where you stand. And when you operate from that place, attraction becomes a byproduct, not a goal. When you remove yourself from the noise of a one-sided connection, time stops being something you wait through and starts becoming something you use. No contact creates distance, but that distance doesn't stay empty for long. It becomes filled with growth, focus, and momentum if you allow it. And that internal shift is what truly changes the dynamic. Most men underestimate how much their energy is tied up in emotional monitoring, checking messages, replaying conversations, wondering where they stand. When that cycle breaks, a massive amount of mental space opens up. At first, that space feels uncomfortable, but soon it becomes productive. You start redirecting attention toward areas of your life that may have been neglected. This is where real change begins. Instead of investing emotional energy into someone who isn't fully present, you invest it into yourself. Your routines become sharper. Your discipline improves. Your focus returns. You're no longer reacting, you're building. And that building creates confidence that doesn't depend on external validation. Growth during silence is visible even when it's not announced. People sense when someone has leveled up. Your posture changes. Your voice steadies. Your decisions become more intentional. You're no longer seeking approval. You're setting direction. That shift in energy is unmistakable. From her perspective, this is where confusion often turns into awareness. She's no longer dealing with the version of you who was emotionally available on demand. She senses that something has changed, even if she can't name it. Your presence feels different because it is different. Momentum creates attraction because it signals purpose. When you're actively improving your life, you become centered around your goals instead of another person's reactions. That independence redefines the dynamic. You're no longer someone to be managed emotionally. You're someone moving forward. This is also where your standards evolve. As you grow, your tolerance for inconsistency drops. You become less willing to accept mixed signals or partial effort. That's not bitterness, that's clarity. You're no longer operating from scarcity. You understand that your time and energy are valuable. No contact accelerates this process because it removes distraction. Without constant emotional engagement, You're forced to face yourself. You identify weaknesses. You refine habits. You strengthen areas that were previously overlooked. That internal work compounds quickly. And here's the key: growth changes your expectations. When you improve, you expect more from yourself and from others. That expectation quietly raises the bar. When someone interacts with you again, they're meeting a different version of you, one who is less reactive, more grounded, and far more selective. This is why the dynamic often flips. She may sense that she no longer has the same influence over your emotional state. You're not waiting. You're not adjusting your life around her responses. You're moving with intention. That shift creates both respect and curiosity. But the real power of growth during silence isn't how it affects her, it's how it affects you. You start to feel whole without needing someone else to complete you. You stop chasing connection and start building alignment. That internal alignment becomes your foundation. If she returns, it's often because she recognizes that she's no longer dealing with the same man. The energy is different. The boundaries are clearer. The self-respect is evident. And if she doesn't return, you're still moving forward from a stronger position. This is why no contact is never wasted time. Even when it leads to nothing externally, it creates everything internally. You become more resilient, more confident, more focused. You learn to invest in what grows you rather than what drains you. And when you operate from growth instead of need, attraction becomes natural. It's no longer forced. It's no longer desired at any cost. It meets you where you are. Because the strongest position you can ever be in is one where your life continues to expand with or without anyone else. There is a moment that quietly changes everything, and most people don't even recognize it when it happens. It's the moment you stop waiting. Not the moment you stop caring, not the moment you feel nothing, but the moment you release the outcome. When you no longer need a specific result to feel grounded, your energy shifts in a way that can't be faked. For most men, no contact starts as a strategy, a way to regain control, restore balance, or provoke a reaction. But if it stays a strategy, it never reaches its full power. The real transformation happens when it stops being something you're doing to get her back and becomes something you're doing to move forward. Detachment is not indifference, it's independence. When you let go of the outcome, you stop scanning the future for signs, you stop counting days, you stop interpreting silence. You come back into the present moment, and in that presence, anxiety dissolves. You're no longer negotiating with uncertainty, you're accepting it. This is where emotional strength is built, not by forcing yourself to be cold, but by trusting yourself enough to be okay either way. When you don't need her return to validate your worth, you remove pressure from the dynamic, and pressure is what suffocates attraction. Detachment sends a powerful signal even when nothing is said. It communicates that your emotional state is self-sustained. You're not dependent on someone else's choices to feel stable. That independence is rare, and rarity creates value. Ironically, this is often the moment when she reaches out. Not because you waited long enough, but because you stopped waiting at all. Energy shifts when attachment dissolves. You're no longer pulling, you're allowing. And allowance creates space. From her perspective, something feels different. There's no emotional tension to lean against. No expectation to manage, no pressure to respond a certain way. Your absence no longer feels heavy, it feels resolved. And that resolution often invites reconnection. But even if it doesn't, you're no longer affected by the outcome. That's the true win. You've reached a place where your peace doesn't depend on someone else's behavior. You're not hoping, resisting, or forcing. You're moving. Detachment also sharpens your discernment. If she returns, you don't rush, you observe. You assess behavior instead of clinging to emotion. You're no longer driven by fear of loss, you're guided by alignment. That shift protects you from repeating old patterns. This is where no contact reaches its highest form. It's no longer about silence, it's about self-trust. You trust yourself to walk away if needed. You trust yourself to stay grounded if she comes back. That trust creates calm confidence. Many men never reach this point because they're afraid of letting go. They hold on to hope because hope feels safer than acceptance. But acceptance is freedom. It allows you to move without emotional resistance. Detachment doesn't make you closed off. It makes you selective. You're still open to connection, just not at the cost of your self-respect. You no longer negotiate your standards for attention. You choose from strength. And this is why when someone returns after no contact, it often feels different. The power dynamic isn't flipped, It's neutralized. You're no longer above or below, you're centered. And centered people don't chase. Whether she returns or not becomes irrelevant. Your life has momentum. Your identity is stable. Your direction is clear. You've reclaimed your emotional autonomy. And that's the paradox of detachment. The less you need someone to choose you, the more attractive you become. But even beyond attraction, you gain something far more valuable. You gain yourself.